I'm absolutely delighted to have got the opportunity to come and share some of the work that I've been doing with you today. Now, yes, my area of expertise is very much about curriculum and pedagogy, and in particular play and playful pedagogies. So accessing the voice of the child is certainly not my area of expertise, but throughout that journey of trying to learn more about quality in the early years and about those playful pedagogy, etc., I have been trying to come to terms to some extent about how you actually access the voice of the child. How do you get in there and find out what's happening in their little lives? So I'm going to share some of the things that I've been doing over the course of time with you, and hopefully you'll learn something from that and enable you to go that little bit further in finding out more about those little experts indeed. So the title of the presentation this morning is From Being Seen to Being Heard, Hearing Young Children's Voices. And what are we going to do? Now, this is all very high tech, so I'm sure I'll make some mistake as I go through, but we'll keep going anyway, is the focus of the presentation. Well, first of all, we're going to try and set it in context and think about, why do we bother trying to give children a voice? How then do we do it? How can we access and hear the little voices? How can we overcome those tensions and challenges? Because it's not all easy stuff by any means. And then, what do those young children have to say, and what can we learn from them? So, why give young children a voice? So we start there. And when I think back to my own childhood days, it was very much about children should be seen and not heard. I remember some of my friends telling me in those good old days that when visitors would come to their house, they had to go to a different part of the house and wouldn't share in anything that the adults were doing. Now, thankfully, my home wasn't like that by any means, but at the same time, I was very much taught to respect my elders. And it was all about Mrs. this and Mr. that. You never called an adult by their first name by any means. And because of all of that being ingrained in me, even to this day, I find it very hard to call my mother-in-law of 16 years Pearl instead of Mrs. Clark. So those days have certainly made a difference in many respects. So it was all about children shutting up in many respects, sitting there doing what they were told and not really giving their views in any shape or form. So that resulted very much in children being passive and adults making decisions for them. And I'm old enough to remember those days back when talking and listening was first introduced into the Northern Ireland curriculum. And many teachers thought about this one and thought, this is a difficult one, you know what I mean? Imagine having children talking in their classrooms in many respects. So they allocated a time in the timetable. So when children were allowed to talk and listen, and then after that it was all about the teacher talking and the children having to listen in that regard. So trying to remind ourselves what it was like, and to many extent we haven't moved on very much in some cases where this is concerned, and but we're trying, and that's the important part. Now, when we look at the Northern Ireland context itself, some harrowing findings. Back in the days when I was growing up, for over 3 decades, Northern Ireland has been fraught with much political and sectarian conflict, as you well know. But with regard to children, between 1969 and 1998, 257 children under the age of 18 died as a consequence of the conflict. 36% of those killed in the conflict were children and young people. And then even to this day, social and emotional transgenerational impact, 1 in 6 children in Northern Ireland are making sectarian and racial remarks. So when you think about that, in those days, children's rights and children's voices were very much removed from the agenda. So thankfully, things aren't like that anymore. We're moving on, trying to make a difference in Northern Ireland in many respects, moving towards a shared future. And there has been, to some extent, a change in thinking. So there is this growing recognition now that children are social participants who have much to contribute. So children can get in there. They're not to stay in the different room when the visitors come in anymore. They can come in and share their views and understandings and their little world with others. They are competent and they are capable. They're not those little vessels to be filled. They do have knowledge that they can share with us. So it's not about that only begins when they go to school and we start doing literacy and numeracy and all those things with them. They are competent and they're capable, and you know that well. They have a right to grow and develop in an environment where their rights are upheld and their needs are met. So there's a recognition that children do need to have a right to do that. And they do possess a voice. It might be only a little voice, but at the same time they do have a voice, and it certainly needs to be heard. And where did this all start? Well, let's think. It all started with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child back in 1989. And in Article 12 of that convention, it states that state parties shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, the views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and the maturity of the child. So there was recognition that children's voices should be listened to right back in 1989. But for those of us who have a real interest in the young child, and indeed the very young child, we felt that there wasn't enough there. It was all to do with the maturity of the child, and therefore do we call 2-year-olds mature enough to have their voice heard. So thankfully things moved on. There was recognition in 2005 that early childhood is a critical period for the realisation of these rights. So just because you're young, it doesn't mean to say that your voice should be ignored. Then moving on in 2006, recognition of the rights of the child to express views and participate in various activities was beneficial for the child, yes, also for the family, but also for the community, the school, the state, and for democracy. So accessing the voice of the child was very important. It not only helped the child, him or herself, but it had far-reaching effects. Then there was a general comment in number 12 in 2009 for the right of the child to be heard. So it's not just about accessing their voice, but you had to sit down and listen and hear what they have to say and act upon it. And the right of the child to be heard and taken seriously. And then our most recent comment with regard to the United Nations Convention, number 14 in 2013, being very young does not deprive the child of the right to express his or her views, nor reduces the weight given to the child's views in determining his or her best interest. So because you're 2-year-old, it doesn't mean to say that you don't know anything about your little life and that your voice shouldn't be heard and taken on board. So there was definite progress there, and so therefore things moved on. We're inviting children's participation isn't an option anymore. It's a legal imperative that we must sit down, listen to their voice and hear what they have to say and act upon it. So then, when we think about this as a result of the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, there's a growing interest to actually do something about that and to look as if we're doing something about it in any case. There's a growing interest in the political world, there's a growing interest in the academic world, and there's a growing interest in the business world. Now, I want you with the person beside you. I'm not going to do all the talking this morning. You're going to have to do a wee bit of thinking as well, because if I do all the talking, it'll go in there and go out there. But sometimes when you get a chance to talk it over with the person beside you, it makes a little bit more sense. So with the person beside you, I want you to consider back to that political arena, the academic arena, and then also then the business world. Why there is a growing interest in listening to children's voices. So we chat there about that one. Moving in, focusing in particularly to children's participation in research itself, okay? So when we think about children participating in research, we say that there are definite benefits of doing so. There are pedagogical benefits, there are political benefits, and then there's this big fancy word that I mightn't get my tongue around, epistemological benefits. Okay, so what does Davis mean by all of this? So in terms of pedagogical benefits, well, if we involve children in research, well then children will learn more from the experience. Okay, so instead of leaving them out and go and asking the parent and go and asking the teacher what they think children like and don't like or whatever it might be in the early years environment, go and ask the children themselves. And from doing so, they learn from that actual experience. Okay, again, the political benefits there. So if we actually tune in to what children have to say, there might be greater impact where our research is concerned, and we might actually change policy better in light of what the children have to say. And then in terms of the epistemological benefits, well, the potential for children to produce improved understandings and better research. So if we're going down a stakeholder approach to our research, and it's focusing on children, well, why leave out the main stakeholder in that regard? You're going to have better informed research if you go to the main stakeholders themselves and ask them their views on a particular aspect of their lives. Okay? So it does have real benefits if we take time. It's not easy, but if we do take time to tune in to what the children have to tell us in our research. And Children's Kinney goes on to say then that when we do so as well, that children's participation will, if we encourage children to participate in practice also, what happens up and beyond the research, well, children are more visible in what's happening. Their learning, their views and their ideas are more visible in our actual experiences that we're providing for them and the environments that we're providing for them. Children are more confident. It's like anything. If they're given the chance to do it, well, they'll get better at it. So children are more confident in expressing their views and ideas and sharing their thinking. And we do know that children nowadays, if we go into any early years setting or any early years classroom, children are much more confident in coming forward and expressing themselves. A greater intimacy between children and adults due to the dialogue between them. So it's not about the adult standing at the front of the room and having all the knowledge and the children knowing nothing. It's about that shared understanding. And as a result, the quality of that experience will be better. And you have deeper relationships between the children themselves, between the children and the adult also, and the adult and the children. So relationships all round will be improved if the children have greater agency in the environment that we're working in with them. So then, what has Northern Ireland's response been in terms of young children? What have they been doing? And you'll know some of this much better than I will in many regards because you've been working very closely in line with many of these policies. But there has been, sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s, a great movement. Sort of after the whole sort of peace movement in a sense, at last there were monies available to invest in young children. And so they had the whole preschool expansion programme where we're trying to make more preschool places available, but also more about improving the quality in those preschool places as well. It's not about just having a place, but it's ensuring that it's a quality place for those children to be in. We have our curricular guidance now for preschool education. So it's not just about a curriculum for the older children, we have our guidance for the young children as well. We've moved away from a very traditional curriculum in the early years of primary schooling towards a curriculum which is much more play-based and focused. So again, responding to what children's needs are and what their interests are in a sense. And then of course we have our long-term strategy, our children and young people, our pledge, a 10-year strategy for children and young people in Northern Ireland, moving beyond just the educational focus, but to other foci as well. And then, of course, the Learning to Learn framework, our early years strategy in a sense, our most recent sort of policy with regard to young children. And within that policy itself, there was, during the consultation process, the children themselves and young children themselves were actually consulted to find out what they wanted in those very important early years of their life. So there's been a suite of policy developments, in a sense, responding to the needs of young children in Northern Ireland. So there definitely has been some progress made away from those days where children were seen and not heard, moving forward to actually consulting with children and taking on board what they have to say. So how do we do it? How can we access and hear young children's voices? It's not an easy one. And something that we need to go back to is the work of Malaguzzi. and thinking about his notion of the 100 languages of children. Sometimes when we're thinking about how do we access young children's voices, all that immediately comes to mind is talking. And I remember as well, many moons ago, the first time I ever got the opportunity to go to policymakers and to ask them to give me some funding to allow me to go out and access the views of young children in playgroup. What would you want to do that for? So they can't even talk. And that's the response I got. Can't even talk. So Malaguzzi recognised that talking was just one way, one language on the part of young children, that there's so many others that we can investigate and learn their views from. And this work and this idea of the 100 languages of children certainly informed the thinking of Clark and Moss. And they developed an approach, which I'm sure some of you have heard about already, called the mosaic approach. Okay, and mosaic immediately gives you that indication, lots of different avenues of doing something. And this mosaic approach to tune into the voice of young children was very much based on the principles that young children are experts in their own right. Yes, they might only be that height, they mightn't be able to construct a sentence more than 2 or 3 words, but they know what it is to be a 2-year-old. And they know better what it is to be a 2-year-old than you do, because it's a long time since each and every one of us was a 2-year-old. So they are experts in their own right. They are skillful communicators. So it doesn't mean to say that they can talk in a way that we can understand them, but they can do all sorts of other things that we can tune into as well. So they're skillful communicators. They are rights holders. They do have rights back to United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. They have a right to be heard and listened to. And they're meaning makers. They're trying to make meaning of their little world as well. So we shouldn't be the ones that are making the meaning for them. So, and up and above that, the mosaic approach for listening is multi-method. So it recognises that children have more than one voice. It's participatory. Back to this idea that children are experts of their own little world. It doesn't mean to say that they're experts about everything by any means. And sometimes we get carried away in the early years world of academia by saying children are experts in everything and know all, and they don't really need an adult at all, which is nonsense in a sense, but at the same time they are experts of their own little lives. So it's reflexive in the sense that it's including children, it's including practitioners, it's including parents' views in the overall interpretation. So it's not about just tuning into the voice of the child, but tuning into the voice of the child also through those who are most close to them, their practitioners, and in particular their parents. It's adaptable, so you can't only use it in a particular setting, you can use it in any type of setting where young children are in. It's focused on children's lived experiences, and that's what we really want to be tuning into. And it's embedded in practice, so it's not something extra as this sort of idea of a bolt-on activity. It's actually embedded in what children are doing every single day. So then, what are the different methods that they sort of advocate in terms of listening and tuning into what children have to say? Well, the first one, and this is the one that I had the chance to use with young children and works very well, where they use cameras to take photographs. So this was something that I did with them in terms of what did they like about playgroup and what did they not like so much about playgroup. So off they went equipped with their own camera, and this immediately stimulates them to want to do it, as you can well imagine, and away they went and they took photographs firstly of what they liked to do and then things that they didn't like to do. And that even led to a focus for them to discuss it in a little bit more depth. Observation is key. So particularly those wee tinies, you observing what they're doing and informing what they're telling us in that way. Perhaps with slightly older children, the child conferencing idea, where you're bringing children together in small groups and getting them to talk about things. Tours led by the children, so a walk outside, and in terms of walking outside and them telling you different things on their way. Map making by children, so the children making little maps about different aspects of their little lives. And then of course, an important one, role play itself. So the whole area of play opens up a child's world in many respects. So observing their play and seeing what happens there and what can we learn about the child through that. And then additional methods up and beyond that, and I have framed these very much around creative, linguistic, physical and technological. I'm going to tell you no more because this time you're going to think about those innovative methods to tune into the voice of the child. So I'll tell you those again because I can't promise you I can go back. So I'm going to tell you them again. Creative. So what creative methods can we use to tune into young children? What sort of linguistic methods can we use? And remember, linguistic might be more than just actually talking to them. What sort of physical methods might we use? And what sort of technological methods might we use? And some of these can draw on already what you've heard about the mosaic approach itself. But thinking about means that you can get into their little world. Okay, a few minutes on that one. As you've identified already, we'll move on to it. How can we overcome the challenges and the tensions? It's not an easy world by any means. And going in and asking information of them, particularly in those areas, they're private things, you know, trying to find ways, in a sense, to talk to them, creative ways, playful ways, but at the same time, safe ways. And being extremely careful about how you go about doing it, but not in a way to scare yourselves and putting yourselves off from doing it. There are ways around it, and that's what we're going to try and think about now. This idea of participation versus protection. And this has very much come up in the literature over the last few years, where sort of this whole idea of tuning into children's voices has become much more popular. So I should have written there in a sense, and I was thinking earlier, over listening to children. So if we get overexcited about the whole thing and we're going about and asking questions of them all the time about this, that and the other, it can become obtrusive. It can be controlling. And it can be a form of surveillance, in a sense, so that you're always going in with a camera and taking photographs and asking questions of them and doing this, that and the other, and trying to invade their privacy, in a sense. Now, when you're going that far, you know it's wrong. And there's an overemphasis on children participating in that sense. And as you said earlier, the best example of that is, and I know well from my own children, if I do ever get the privilege of picking them up from school and you ask them how the day has gone or whatever it might be, well, all I ever seem to get as a response is, fine, fine. But you do well know if their little day hasn't gone fine, that they'll be telling you everything about it. So, but trying not to overdo it, but at the same time, you're not underdoing it, that you're overprotecting them and you're covering them up in cotton wool. And as a result of doing that, children will become passive. They'll become to some extent vulnerable because adults are making all the decisions for them. And it's given this idea out there that children are deficient, and it's moving beyond this idea that children are competent little human beings right from the outset. So it's trying to get to grips. And it's very much a common sense approach, balancing participation with protection. We do have to protect our little children, particularly in the world that they live in today, where social media and whatever is just trying to gulp them into some world that we don't even want to know about. So in a sense, we do need to protect them, but at the same time, we need to allow them to participate in the little worlds and lives that they have. So it's thinking about how we can overcome and move towards that more balanced approach. And it's thinking about the ethical issues that are involved in putting up a video and getting them to talk about all the little private things and whatever it might be. So it's making sure that you have consent and assent from the adult who's involved in the particular setting, from the parent, and most importantly, from the child. So you do have to tune in to whether a child wants to do it. And if they're feeling unhappy or they don't want to do it any longer, they might have decided to do want to do this or want to come and talk to the puppet or whatever it might be. But then when they start off, they say, no, I don't want to do it, and they wander away off. It certainly doesn't mean that you wander after them and make them come back again. So it's making sure that children have an idea of what they have to do, that they're knowledgeable, that you're open and honest, that you're not, you know what I mean, hiding anything from them. You're open and honest about where this data is going to go and how it's going to be used and whatever, and telling them it in a way that they understand, and making sure that you're not doing anything that's harmful to those little children. And harmful doesn't necessarily always mean that we're going to go in and abuse them physically. But is there something that we could say that might hurt them in any particular way? And making sure that the tools that we use, the visual data through photographs and drawings and whatever, as a means to explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it and what the information is going to be used for. So a common sense approach, asking their permission. It's no point just asking the parents' permission. It's important that you do so, but you must also ask the permission of the child, him or herself. Now, there's a lot that's been written, and Lewis is somebody that writes a lot about this methodology of silence. So if a child has given their consent to come and talk to you about something or to paint pictures for you or whatever it might be, and then when you sit down to do so, they decide to say nothing. This methodology of silence, as well as a methodology of voice. You just don't ignore that. Again, if they don't want to do it, they've decided to say nothing, you record that they've said nothing, and you let them on and to do whatever they want to do instead. Then our own role is very important. So we're very big people as compared to little tinies. So we don't use the power that we have through our size and whatever. We get right down to the level of the child and we talk to them in a way that is appropriate for a child. So it's important that those people who are going in to access the voice of the child for research purposes know those children inside out. So you just don't go off on the first day and start talking to them. You're in and out of that setting for a period of time so that they become familiar with you before you would even think about starting to move forward to collect data from them. Then thinking also about the analysis of the data. Sometimes the research accuses us, yes, we go off and we do all these fancy things with children, these creative and playful approaches we use with them to access their voice, and lo and behold then when it comes to the analysis of those data, then we start to, it's you, the adult, that decides what they mean by painting a picture of a nurse or whatever it might be. And lo, she's very much arguing against this adultist approach and trying to get ways around that. And there have been notions about using older children so that in the analysis part, this buddy system, and trying to get the older children to help in the analysis of what the younger children are saying. Also then you have people like Jill Dunn, who works up in Stranmillis with myself, who talks about these sort of using children throughout the research itself, not just in terms of collecting the data from them, but that you consult with them right at the beginning, in the middle and at the end. These are sort of like a kind of advisory board, and it's the children that inform how the research progresses. So this is an important one as well to think about. It's not just collecting the data, it's how you then interpret and analyse the data in a child-friendly way. Back to those issues of power and relationships. Again, that you're not making children say things just because they know you might want them to say it. Or you're not making them do things in a way just because they know you might want them to do it. So it's trying to, and if you're aware of that, then perhaps it will enable you to think otherwise. And then again, back to these tools fit for purpose. That you're not using things that are inappropriate for young children, that you're using creative methodologies that enable them to actually express themselves in a child-friendly way. So, what do young children have to say? And this is the part that excites me most. So, going to here give you some sort of feedback from the children themselves and a few different projects that I have been involved with. And again, the projects that I have been involved with are principally educational in that regard. So what do the young children have to say? So this is a study that I did along with Carl McGuinness and Liz Sproul, etc. Anybody that maybe knows Carl, who's the great thinking guru, you might have met her before. But it was trying to tune in to children's accounts of a play-based experience. And we talked to 72 children, nursery, year 1, year 2 and year 3. So nursery about going into P1 and the experience that they might have there, P1 reflecting back, then year 2 thinking about what year 3 might be like, and then year 3 reflecting back. So what did they have to say? Well, it seemed to be in the analysis of the data that we received, the children were very much telling us that they wanted a balanced approach in the early years, and they wanted something to do with challenge. They wanted to be challenged. Let's see what they had to say. In P1, you still get to play, but it's not baby play, you know. You have to be big to play there. You learn lots of new things. I can't wait for the big hard questions. You get to do harder play. I love P3. You learn really important stuff there. It's still fun and it's better. P3 is great. You really have to think now. P1 is great because you do big work up there. My mum, now would you hear? Little Johnny knows all about it. My mum says you can't play forever. In P3, you just have to work hard to get a good job. But I hope it's exciting. So poor little Johnny, dear love him, Mummy has him well primed as to what it's all about. So up and above the challenge then, what were the little ones telling us then? They also told us things about security. Now, they did tell us a little bit more about the teacher. When they were asked about the teacher, I'll tell you some very important things first before I go to this. You had to have long hair. So if you don't have long hair, you're out. You had to be young, so if you're anything like me, you're definitely out. What was the other thing they often said too? That you had to smile all the time. So having long hair, being young and smiling, you're in. If you're not that sort of a person, get out now. So that was very important to them. And another one, when I was heading for the first day with my eldest son, who's now 14, I remember as well heading in, because you nearly remember, well, I remember the things with Joshua best because he was the first to do it. When it comes to the little one, I don't remember anything. But anyway, so driving in to school for the induction morning in the P1 classroom, and you were talking about all sorts of things and what might he see in school and whatever it might be. And the next thing he turned round to me and he says, you know, Mummy, I hope my teacher, and I was wondering, going to be nice, going to be pleasant, going to be whatever, has lovely hair. So it's all about hair. So I tell you, that's a very important one. But anyway, this is what these children were saying, the important messages up and beyond those ones. The teacher had to be friendly, who was caring, not bossy, jokey and kind. I wouldn't want my friend to go away. I love playing with them. Maybe if I get a wrong answer, the teacher might not help me. Happy friends to make you feel welcome. And Mrs. H, the dinner lady, tells me that she watches out for me and she helps me to cut up my dinner. So that feeling of security is very important to young children. So whilst they have all this important messages about being challenged, they also want to feel secure in their early years experience. Up and beyond this, now this was a master's student's work and a very exciting piece of work that she did for her dissertation. And the study was carried out in two different school settings, one rural and one large town. And those are the children that she worked with. And the study sought to gain understanding of how Northern Ireland children in the foundation stage, so again 4 to 6 year olds, view play as a learning experience and what they actually perceive play to be. And she had what do you like to play with in school, and she used this flower to record the children's responses. So something again that they could tune into. So I like playing with dough, I like the junk table, etc., etc. Then what do you dislike? And she used an apple tree here. And again, P1 teacher herself knew all about it and knowing how to get right down in there to what the children had to tell her. And then she used the visual stimulus of painting and getting children to paint what they liked. And I love looking at children's paintings. I always think you find out so much. But I like playing in the flower shop because I get to dress up and pretend to be the mummy. I can buy daffodils for Granny. I like Mobilo because I can make anything. I made a robot and then I added something about blue bits, more blue bits, and made it into a rocket, and I fly it around in the classroom. Puppets are my favourite. I like putting on a voice and everyone laughs. And lots more. I like playing dough because it's squishy and slimy. I like playing outside because I can pick what I like. I get the red scooter. And I like playing with the big snakes and ladders that goes on the floor because I get to win. All about that competitive side coming through there. And then I've mentioned to you before about the PGCE students up in Strand having the opportunity to go out and doing a small project with the children that they were working with in an effort to try and find out something. And this particular group, they wanted to find out what children's views were on a scientist. All right, and they went right through the foundation stage, right up to key stage 1, so 4 to 8-year-olds in a sense. And the reason that they wanted to do it, to find out more and if there was progress about what children's views on a scientist were from 4 to 8. And some of the methods that they used, they posed questions, they recorded the answers, they did drawings, and they used role play, the dressing up as an incentive to try and get children to talk to them. Oh dear, I'm way on anyway, but P2, some of their little drawings that come to the fore, and what do they think a scientist's all about? This one here's fantastic, look at the curly hair and the glasses and whatever else. Makes things like medical things, makes potions and goo, needs lots of jars, works in a basement. Why? They don't want people to know they're scientists. Then this one here tells you great stuff. Draws pictures for a museum and wears black trousers and a white coat. You're not allowed anything else. By P3, where are they going now? A person who does experiments, someone who wears a white coat, makes stuff, blows up stuff, makes projects, teaches children, and again, your blowing up stuff is becoming a great idea in P3. And then by P4, look at the sophisticated drawings by now. I tell you, they have it to a T. Mad Marl studies things, invents things, studies chemicals, studies moons and stars and planets, carries out experiments and help people work in a laboratory. Different types of scientists for different types of science and a study of the unknown. So what sophisticated understanding of a scientist by the age of 7, 8. Now, one of the latest ones that we're working on, and I do apologise because these are just pencil drawings and they haven't come out very well at all, but it's simply just to say that Carol and myself are working on trying to tune in to what children have to say about what thinking is. So that very abstract term, if you or I were asked about that, I think it would be difficult enough, but what do children as young as 4 have to say about what thinking is? And these are the feedback from the P1 children, so the 4 to 5-year-olds. Thinking is lots of minions. So that's what he was thinking about at that particular time, so that's what thinking is. Thinking is lots of minions. A little bit more sophisticated here. Thinking is something in here and pointing to the head. So knowing that something's going on in the brain when you think. Thinking, and again, lovely little cars here being drawn, but you haven't been able to see them well. Thinking is which car I want to play with. So trying to do some degree of problem solving there. To go with the red one, to go with the blue one, is it the green one? Or thinking is how to get to my house. And again, quite a sophisticated little drawing here about where the house is, where the roads are, etc., etc. So that's what thinking is all about. And then this is right up to a key stage 2 child. And a very sophisticated drawing about what thinking is, all broken up into the little areas of the brain. There's writing, the brainwave department. I think I need a bit more of the brainwave department sometimes. The nerve system, thinking goes on here, memory for Maz, feelings. Look at that. A real, well, you know what I mean, just a wonderful way to tune in to what that child's views and thinking are. I'll give you an example. I did it with my own child last year. He would have been 6 at the time, and I got him to draw what he thought thinking was. So he had a picture of himself, he had a picture of a bubble, and then he had a picture of smoke coming out of his head. So when I showed it to the teacher, she was busy telling me, that's what you're doing to your poor child, the smoke's coming out of his head. So with just their little interpretation of things. But the important thing is, when you collect this data, don't just leave it in a cupboard. Use it to inform the next steps, whether it is to inform your practice, whether it is to inform the next steps where your research is concerned, or whatever it might be. But it's not just about doing it, it's also using it and making sure that those children's voices are actually being heard. Now, so we've come to the end, and come to the end very quickly indeed, but I think I'm right on time. So I don't know how I managed that one, but I did. But so what have we learnt throughout this presentation? And I hope there's something that you've learnt, but I hope in a sense that you have realised, and I know each and every one of you have known this already, but the young children can express themselves and can express themselves in many ways. And they certainly do have important things to say. And I just want to leave you with this. If you remember nothing else, You're wondering, what on earth has she a picture of a caterpillar for and a picture of butterflies? What has that to do with children's voices? Listen to this and bear with me. I remember one morning when I discovered a cocoon in the back of a tree, just as a butterfly was making a hole in its case and preparing to come out. I waited a while, but it was too long in appearing, and I was impatient. I bent over it and breathed on it to warm it. I warmed it as quickly as I could, and the miracle began to happen before my eyes, faster than life. The case opened, the butterfly started slowly crawling out, and I shall never forget my horror when I saw how its wings were folded back and crumpled. The wretched butterfly tried with its whole trembling body to unfold them. Bending over it, I tried to help it with my breath, but in vain. It needed to be hatched out patiently, and the unfolding of the wings should be a natural process in the sun. Now it was too late. My breath had forced the butterfly to appear all crumpled before its time. In society today, we as adults think we have all the answers about how to work with young children. And in many cases, we're forcing them down a path that is totally unsuitable, resulting in crumpled butterfly or crumpled caterpillars. Perhaps if we took more time to listen to our young children and hear what they're actually telling us, our little butterflies would have the opportunity to spread their wings and fly. Let's get to it.